My scales are natural armor. My fists can shatter stone. In my culture, strength is a physical law, a truth you can measure in the enemies you have broken. When I first laid eyes on the humans, soft, fragile, and fleeting, I saw a species destined for servitude. It was the gravest, most arrogant miscalculation in my empire's history, and a lesson that began with the scream of a pirate's cannon. First contact and misunderstanding the transport ship Void Talon drifted through the asteroid belt like a predator stalking prey. Kextar pressed his armored face against the viewing port, watching the human mining colony grow larger in the distance. The facility looked pathetic compared to Zephyrian military installations, just a collection of metal domes connected by fragile tubes clinging to the surface of a dead rock floating in space. Commander Thane moved beside him, his battle scars gleaming white against dark blue scales. Look at this primitive settlement, Kextar. These humans barely qualify as a spacefaring species. The commanders for arms gestured dismissively at the colony. Our High Council wants to evaluate them as potential allies against the Scoran Horde, but I see nothing here worth our time. Kextar nodded agreement, though something nagged at his warrior instincts. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 17 star systems through superior strength and advanced technology. Their natural armor could deflect energy weapons, therefore arms gave them combat advantages, and their ships moved faster than anything else in known space. These humans, with their soft pink skin and fragile two-armed bodies, seemed like children playing at war. The docking procedures took longer than expected because human technology operated so slowly. When the airlock finally opened, Kextar followed Commander Thane into corridors that felt unnaturally warm and bright. Everything was designed for creatures much smaller and weaker than Zephyrians. The walls were covered with colorful images showing Earth landscapes and smiling human faces, a waste of space that served no military purpose. Captain Maria Santos waited in what she called the reception bay. She stood barely chest-high to Kextar, wearing a simple blue uniform instead of proper armor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her brown eyes showed no fear despite facing two aliens who could easily tear her apart with bare claws. When she extended one small hand toward Commander Thane, Kextar wondered if this was some kind of surrender gesture. "Welcome to Mining Station Omega 7, she said in accented Standard Galactic. "I'm Captain Santos, Colony Administrator. We appreciate the Zephyrian Empire taking time to visit our humble operation." Commander Thane awkwardly touched the human's soft hand in what they called a handshake. The gesture seemed pointless and vulnerable compared to the Zephyrian greeting of crossing claws in respect. "We are here to assess your defensive capabilities and resource production," he replied bluntly. "The High Council requires accurate data about human military potential." A male human with short black hair stepped forward. "I'm Dr. James Chun, our research director. Would you like to tour our facilities? We've made some interesting discoveries about asteroid mineral extraction that might benefit both our species." Kextar studied Dr. Chen's friendly expression and wondered if these humans understood they were being evaluated as cannon fodder for the coming war against the Scoran Horde. The Scorans were expanding their territory through the galaxy like a plague, consuming resources and enslaving entire populations. Every civilized species would eventually face their advance, and the Zephyrian Empire needed allies with large populations who could absorb casualties while superior forces planned strategy. The tour began in the Mining Operations Center, where humans worked alongside mechanical equipment to extract rare minerals from the asteroid's core. Kextar observed their techniques with growing disappointment. Everything moved slowly and carefully, with multiple safety protocols that prevented efficient resource extraction. Zephyrian mining teams would have stripped this asteroid clean in half the time. "We prioritize worker safety over speed," Dr. Chen explained when Commander Thane questioned their methods. "Every person here has a family back on Earth or Mars. We make sure everyone goes home." The concept puzzled Kextar. Zephyrian miners accepted dangerous working conditions as part of their duty to the Empire. Individual survival was less important than maximizing productivity for the greater good. These humans seemed to value each worker's life more than the mission's success, which violated basic military logic. The residential sections were even more confusing. Humans had decorated their living spaces with personal items that served no practical purpose: photographs of family members, colorful artwork, and plants grown purely for aesthetic reasons. Children played in communal areas while adults watched them with obvious affection. The entire colony felt more like a peaceful village than a strategic outpost. How many military personnel do you have stationed here? Commander Thane asked as they observed families eating together in a common dining area. We're primarily a civilian operation, Captain Santos replied. We have 20 security officers and basic defensive systems, but our main focus is research and resource extraction. Kextar exchanged glances with his commander. 20 security officers to defend over 300 civilians? The humans were either incredibly naive or completely defenseless. No wonder they needed stronger allies to survive the coming galactic conflicts. The weapons demonstration took place in a small training facility that would have fit inside a Zephyrian supply closet. The humans showed off their personal firearms and energy weapons with obvious pride, not realizing they were displaying equipment that was obsolete by galactic standards. Their body armor looked like thick fabric compared to Zephyrian natural scales, and their tactics emphasized team coordination over individual combat prowess. We focus on protecting civilians and minimizing casualties, explained Security Chief Rodriguez, a woman even smaller than Captain Santos. Our job is to buy time for evacuation procedures, not to achieve glorious victories in battle. The statement confirmed Kextar's worst fears about human military potential. They fought like prey animals instead of predators, planning retreat before they even engaged enemies. How could such weak-minded creatures possibly stand against the Scoran Horde's savage advance? That evening, the humans invited their guests to share what they called a welcome dinner. Kextar found himself seated at a table with Dr. Chun and several other humans who asked endless questions about Zephyrian culture and technology. They seemed genuinely curious about alien perspectives rather than trying to gather intelligence for military purposes. "What's your home world like?" asked a young engineer named Lisa Park. "Do you have families similar to humans?" Kextar described the warrior traditions of his clan and the honor of serving the Empire's expansion across the galaxy. The humans listened with fascination, but seemed confused by concepts like individual glory and conquest for territorial gain. They kept asking about cooperation and mutual benefit instead of victory and dominance. "It must be difficult being away from home for long military campaigns," Dr. Chin observed. "How do you maintain connections with your family while serving in space?" The question caught Kextar off guard. Zephyrian warriors were expected to put duty before personal relationships. Family bonds were sources of weakness that enemies could exploit. Yet, these humans spoke constantly about missing their loved ones and wanting to return home safely. Their entire society seemed built around protecting each other instead of achieving military objectives. As the evening progressed, Kextar noticed how the humans interacted with each other. They shared food freely, helped with each other's tasks without being ordered, and showed genuine concern for everyone's well-being. Children moved between adults with complete trust, and elderly colonists received the same respect as productive workers. It was unlike anything he had witnessed in Zephyrian military culture. The alarm began screaming at 0347 station time, 3 hours after the welcome dinner had ended. Kextar was reviewing defensive plans in his guest quarters when red lights started flashing throughout the facility. Commander Thane's voice crackled through the communication system from their ship. "Kextar, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Configuration matches pirate raider patterns. Large fleet approaching fast." Kextar grabbed his weapons and rushed toward the command center, expecting to find chaos and panic among the human civilians. Instead, he discovered Captain Santos calmly coordinating with her officers while Dr. Chin worked at a computer terminal. Nobody was screaming or running in terror despite facing almost certain death. "How many ships?" Santos asked her communications officer without a trace of fear in her voice. 15 confirmed raiders, captain. Mixed configuration with heavy assault craft and boarding vessels. They're demanding immediate surrender and transfer of all refined minerals. Commander Thane entered the command center with his weapon drawn, ready to fight his way back to their ship. Captain Santos, we will evacuate to our vessel immediately. This facility cannot be defended against such overwhelming force. Santos turned to face the Zephyrian commander with steady eyes. With respect, Commander, we're not abandoning our people. 300 civilians live here, including 47 children. 300 civilians live here, including 47 children. Someone has to protect them. The statement shocked Kextar more than the approaching pirate fleet. These humans were choosing certain death over tactical retreat. Either they were too stupid to understand basic military logic, or they operated according to principles that he couldn't comprehend. Your security force cannot possibly defeat 15 raider ships, Commander Thane pointed out with obvious frustration. Evacuation is the only logical option. The evacuation shuttles can't carry everyone, Security Chief Rodriguez replied as she checked her weapons. And the pirates would just hunt them down anyway. We make our stand here. Dr. Chen looked up from his computer terminal with grim determination. I've activated the mining charges throughout the asteroid. If we can lure them into close range, we might be able to damage their ships with controlled explosions. Kextar stared at the human scientist in disbelief. This soft-spoken researcher was calmly planning to turn their entire home into a weapon. The idea demonstrated both suicidal desperation and tactical creativity that impressed him despite his contempt for human weakness. You would destroy your own colony to fight raiders, he asked. We would sacrifice anything to protect innocent people, Santos answered without hesitation. That's what humans do when cornered. We fight. As the pirate fleet closed distance with the mining station, Kextar realized he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of these strange mammals forever. They weren't preparing to die with honor like Zephyrian warriors. They were preparing to make their deaths count for something greater than personal glory. The first energy blasts from the pirate ships lit up space around the asteroid as the battle began. Kextar gripped his plasma rifle and wondered if he was about to learn why the galaxy should fear humanity, not because of their strength, but because of what they were willing to sacrifice when pushed too far. Part 2. The battle and human resilience. The first wave of pirate fighters screamed past the mining station like metal wasps, their energy cannons carving glowing scars across the asteroid surface. Kextar braced himself against the command center wall as the entire facility shuddered under the assault. Through the reinforced windows, he watched human security officers taking positions at defensive emplacements that looked pitifully inadequate against the attacking force. Shields at 60% and falling, reported Communications Officer Williams, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Pirates are demanding immediate surrender and transfer of all personnel to their ships. Captain Santos keyed her microphone without hesitation. This is Mining Station Omega, 7 to approaching vessels. We reject your terms. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The response came back as another barrage of energy fire that sent tremors through the station's framework. Kextar expected the humans to panic or reconsider their foolish defiance, but instead they moved with calm efficiency that reminded him of seasoned veterans preparing for battle. Commander Thane activated his personal shield generator and checked his heavy plasma rifle. Kextar, we fight our way to the docking bay and escape to our ship. These humans can die for their stubbornness if they choose, but we have intelligence to report to the High Council. Before Kextar could respond, a massive explosion rocked the station as the first pirate boarding craft slammed into the outer hull. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically while damage reports flooded the communication channels. The humans responded to each crisis with practiced coordination, as if they had rehearsed this scenario countless times. Boarding teams detected in sections 7 through 12, Security Chief Rodriguez announced over the general comm, all civilians to safe rooms immediately. Security teams Alpha and Beta defensive positions around the residential areas. Teams Gamma and Delta prepare to repel boarders. Kextar watched 20 human security officers prepare to face hundreds of pirate raiders armed with military-grade weapons. The mathematical impossibility of their situation should have sent them into despair, but instead they moved with grim determination that spoke of absolute commitment to their cause, the Doctor. Chin approached Captain Santos with a tablet displaying mining tunnel schematics. Maria, I can route the pirates through maintenance corridors where we've placed explosive charges. If we time it right, we can eliminate large groups before they reach populated areas. The plan required using their own infrastructure as a weapon while risking catastrophic damage to life support systems. Any miscalculation would kill everyone aboard the station. But Santos approved the strategy without hesitation. Do it, James. Save as many people as you can. A young security officer named Peterson ran past carrying equipment that looked like improvised explosives. He couldn't have been older than 20 Earth years, but his face showed the same resolve that Kextar had seen in veteran Zephyrian warriors before hopeless battles. The first pirates breached the main corridor with weapons blazing and battle cries echoing through the facility. They were Kavari mercenaries, scaled reptilians similar to Zephyrians but smaller and more vicious. Their armor was military grade, and their tactics were professional, designed to overwhelm civilian targets through superior firepower and intimidation. Security Chief Rodriguez led her teams into combat with weapons that should have been useless against professional raiders. But the humans fought like creatures defending their nests, using every tactical advantage their knowledge of the station could provide. They turned maintenance shafts into killing zones, used industrial equipment as improvised weapons, and coordinated their attacks with communication systems the pirates couldn't intercept to Kextar. Found himself drawn into the battle when a group of Kavari raiders cornered him in a side corridor. His training took over as he fired his plasma rifle and activated his personal shields, cutting down attackers with efficient precision. But when he looked around for the nearest escape route, he realized he was moving toward the residential sections instead of the docking bay. The human civilians had barricaded themselves in reinforced shelters, but Kextar could hear children crying through the sealed doors. The sound triggered something primal in his warrior instincts, not the predatory hunger for combat, but the protective fury of someone defending the helpless. He had never experienced such feelings during his military career, Doctor. Chin appeared beside him, carrying a modified mining laser that had been converted into a portable weapon. The raiders are trying to break into Safe Room 3, he said between heavy breaths. 40 people trapped inside, including most of our children. Without thinking, Kextar followed the human scientist toward the sounds of combat. They found Peterson and 2 other security officers trying to hold a defensive position against a dozen Kavari raiders who were cutting through the safe room doors with plasma torches. The human defenders were clearly outgunned and would be overwhelmed within minutes. Kextar charged into the battle with a roar that echoed through the corridor. His plasma rifle cut down 3 raiders before they could react, while his armored body absorbed energy blasts that would have killed the humans instantly. Dr. Chun used his improvised weapon to provide covering fire as Peterson threw homemade explosives into the enemy formation. The battle turned into close combat as ammunition ran low on both sides. Kextar found himself fighting back-to-back with Peterson, a human barely half his size, who wielded a vibraknife with desperate skill. When a Kavari raider's claws opened Peterson's throat, the young human kept fighting until blood loss finally dropped him. Dr. Chun dragged the wounded security officer to cover, while Kextar held the corridor alone against the remaining attackers. As he fought, he heard Captain Santos' voice over the communication system coordinating defensive actions throughout the station. She was directing the battle from a command center while simultaneously managing life, support systems, and evacuation procedures. Explosive charges detonated in Section 9. Estimated 15 raiders eliminated. Minimal damage to primary systems. Team Delta has secured the medical bay, preparing to receive casualties. Civilian evacuation to inner safe rooms 90% complete. All children accounted for. The humans were losing people with every passing minute, but they continued fighting with a kind of organized desperation that Kextar had never witnessed. They weren't trying to achieve victory through superior force or tactical brilliance. They were buying time with their lives, measuring success by how many innocent people survived rather than how many enemies they killed. When the safe room doors finally opened, Kextar found himself face to face with 40 terrified humans who looked at him with gratitude instead of fear. Children peered around their parents' legs, while elderly colonists clutched personal belongings they had grabbed during the evacuation. These were the people the security officers were dying to protect. Ordinary families who had no military value but infinite worth in human estimation. That a little girl with curly brown hair approached him despite her mother's attempts to hold her back. "Thank you for helping us," she said in a small voice that somehow carried across the sounds of distant battle. "Are you going to make the bad people go away?" Kextar stared at the child and realized he was looking at something that the Zephyrian Empire had forgotten in its pursuit of galactic dominance. These humans weren't fighting for territory or resources or strategic advantage. They were fighting for the right of children to grow up in safety, for families to stay together, for ordinary people to live ordinary lives without fear to doctor. Chun finished treating Peterson's wounds and rejoined the battle carrying another modified piece of mining equipment. "The charges worked better than expected," he reported. "We've eliminated about 60 raiders, but more keep boarding. Rodriguez thinks we have maybe an hour before they overrun our positions." Captain Santos appeared in the corridor carrying a rifle and wearing improvised body armor. "James, take our guests and the civilians to the deep shelters. I'm implementing Protocol 7. The scientist's face went pale. "Maria, Protocol 7 will destroy half the station. We'll lose the mining equipment, the research data, everything we've built here. Better than losing the people we swore to protect," she replied with iron determination. "Get them to safety. That's an order." As Dr. Chun led the civilians toward the deep shelters, Kextar found himself following Captain Santos back toward the command center. Commander Thane's voice crackled through his personal communicator, demanding immediate evacuation to their ship. But Kextar ignored the orders and continued fighting alongside the humans who had shown him something he had never expected to see. These soft, weak mammals were the most dangerous creatures he had ever encountered, not because of their weapons or armor or tactical skills, but because they were absolutely unwilling to abandon each other. Every human who fell was mourned and avenged. Every civilian who survived justified any sacrifice. They fought not from bloodlust or territorial instinct, but from love transformed into weapon that could stand against any force in the galaxy. The battle raged through the station's corridors as more pirates boarded and human defenses slowly crumbled under overwhelming numbers. But even as their positions fell one by one, the humans never stopped fighting for each other. They transformed their home into a fortress, their tools into weapons, and their love into courage that nothing could break. Explosions echoed through the facility, and energy weapons lit up the darkness. Kextar realized he was witnessing the birth of something that would terrify the galaxy. Not because humans were strong, but because they had discovered a kind of strength that made victory irrelevant as long as innocent people survived. Understanding and revelation, the final explosion shook the mining station so violently that Kextar thought the entire asteroid might split apart. Captain Santos had triggered the mining charges in a coordinated sequence that collapsed 3 main corridors simultaneously, trapping the remaining pirates in sections that were rapidly losing atmosphere. The tactical brilliance of using their own infrastructure as a weapon had turned the tide of battle, but at a cost that left the station barely functional. Kextar picked himself up from the floor of the command center, his armor cracked and his body aching from wounds that would have killed any human. Around him, the surviving security officers tended to their injured while monitoring systems that flickered between operational and critical failure. The air tasted of smoke and ozone, while emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. Final count, Security Chief Rodriguez reported in a voice hoarse from shouting orders. 11 raiders escaped in a damaged ship. The rest are either dead or trapped in sealed sections. No civilian casualties, but we lost 8 security personnel and 3 engineers. Captain Santos nodded gravely as she studied damage reports on her cracked monitor. Dr. Chun, what's our status on life support and structural integrity? The scientist looked up from his diagnostic equipment with exhaustion written across his face. We can maintain basic life support for maybe 6 hours. After that, we'll need to evacuate to the emergency shelters on the other side of the asteroid. The mining operation is completely destroyed, and we've lost 40% of our living space. Kextar watched the humans process this information with the same calm determination they had shown throughout the battle. They had essentially destroyed their own home to protect each other, and nobody seemed to regret the decision. Their priorities were so alien to Zephyrian thinking that he struggled to comprehend the logic behind their actions. Commander Thane finally entered the command center, his pristine armor and unbloodied weapons marking him as someone who had spent the battle in safety aboard their ship. Kextar, the evacuation shuttle is prepared. We must depart immediately to report these events to the High Council. Before Kextar could respond, a weak transmission crackled through the communication system. It was one of the trapped pirates, a Kavari raider calling for medical assistance as his section lost life support. The logical response would be to ignore the enemy's distress and let him die slowly in the darkness. Instead, Dr. Chun immediately grabbed an emergency medical kit and headed for the sealed section. I can reach him through the maintenance shafts, he told Santos. It'll take about 20 minutes. James, that raider tried to kill us all, Rodriguez pointed out. He would have murdered our children without hesitation. Why risk your life to save him? Dr. Chin paused at the doorway and looked back with tired but determined eyes. Because that's what humans do. We save lives even when it doesn't make sense, especially when it doesn't make sense. Kextar followed the scientist through twisted corridors and damaged passages, watching as he risked his own safety to reach an enemy who deserved no mercy. The trapped Kavari was unconscious and badly injured, but Dr. Chin worked to stabilize his condition with the same care he would have shown a human patient. Why? Kextar asked as they carried the unconscious raider back toward the medical bay. This creature would have killed your people without hesitation. He has no value to your colony or your species. Dr. Chen adjusted his grip on the stretcher and considered the question seriously. Every life has value, regardless of the choices someone has made. If we start deciding who deserves to live based on their actions, we become the kind of people who attack mining colonies for profit. The medical bay was crowded with injured humans receiving treatment from the station's small staff. Despite having only basic facilities, they had managed to save everyone who could be saved. The wounded security officers would recover completely, and even the pirates who had been captured alive were receiving medical attention. Kextar observed how the humans treated their own injured and their enemies with equal care. They shared their limited medical supplies freely, worked beyond exhaustion to help anyone who needed assistance, and showed no bitterness toward the people who had tried to destroy their home. Such behavior violated every principle of military logic and resource management. In the residential area, families were reuniting after hours of terror and uncertainty. Parents held their children while trying not to show how frightened they had been. The elderly colonists who had lived through other conflicts offered comfort to younger residents experiencing their first battle. Everyone grieved for the 11 people who had died protecting them. The memorial service took place in the main gathering area where Captain Santos spoke about each person who had been lost. She didn't focus on their tactical contributions or military achievements, but on their personal qualities and the lives they had touched. Peterson was remembered for his terrible jokes and his devotion to his girlfriend back on Earth. Engineer Martinez was honored for his skill at fixing anything mechanical and his tendency to hum while working. They died so that others could live, Santos concluded, not for glory or conquest or strategic advantage, but because they believed every person in this colony was worth protecting. That belief made them heroes, and it will guide us as we rebuild. Kextar had attended countless military funerals throughout his career, ceremonies focused on honoring warrior courage and clan glory. But he had never witnessed grief transformed into something that strengthened rather than weakened the survivors. These humans mourned their dead by recommitting themselves to the values that had made the sacrifice meaningful. As the memorial ended, families began the work of cleaning up their damaged home and planning for an uncertain future. The mining operation was destroyed, their defensive systems were offline, and they faced months of difficult reconstruction with limited resources. Yet, nobody talked about abandoning the colony or requesting transfer to safer assignments. Dr. Chun found Kextar in the observation lounge, watching repair crews work on the station's exterior hull. "Penny for your thoughts?" the scientist asked, using a human expression that made no literal sense. "Your species confuses me," Kextar admitted. "You have no natural armor, primitive weapons, and tactical doctrine that prioritizes weakness over strength. Yet, you achieved victory against overwhelming odds through methods my people would consider suicidal." Dr. Chin sat down beside him and gazed out at the stars beyond the damaged station. "Maybe that's because we define victory differently than your people do. We didn't win because we killed more enemies or captured more territory. We won because our children are safe and our community survived." The concept was so foreign to Zephyrian thinking that Kextar struggled to process it. Your entire civilization could be conquered by any species with superior military technology. How do you expect to survive in a galaxy full of predators? By being something worth preserving, Dr. Chin replied simply, "By proving that cooperation creates more value than conquest, that protecting the weak makes everyone stronger, and that some things are worth dying for even if you can't win." That evening, Commander Thane demanded an immediate private conference in their shuttle. His frustration with Kextar's behavior had been growing throughout their visit, and now it erupted into open anger. "You fought alongside these primitives instead of securing our evacuation route," he snarled. "You have forgotten your duty to the Empire and your loyalty to our species." Kextar activated his personal shield and drew his sidearm, causing his commander to step back in shock. "I have learned something here that the High Council needs to understand. These humans are not potential cannon fodder for our war against the Scorans. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy." "Dangerous?" Thane laughed contemptuously. "They can barely defend one mining station against common pirates. Their weapons are obsolete, their tactics are inefficient, and their casualty rates are unacceptable by any military standard. They are dangerous because they cannot be defeated." Kextar replied with growing certainty, "You can kill them, but you cannot make them surrender what they believe in. You can destroy their homes, but they will rebuild them. You can threaten their lives, but they will die to protect strangers without hesitation." Commander Thane studied his subordinate with growing alarm. "You have been contaminated by exposure to their emotional thinking. When we return to the homeworld, you will undergo psychological evaluation and reconditioning. When we return to the homeworld, I will report to the High Council that humanity should be feared, not dismissed. Any species that encounters them in battle will face an enemy that fights for reasons beyond logic or survival instinct. They fight for love, and that makes them unstoppable." The journey back to Zephyrian space took 3 weeks, during which Kextar spent his time writing a detailed report that he knew would shock the military leadership. He described human tactics and capabilities with scientific precision, but also tried to convey something that could not be measured in weapons counts or casualty statistics. The High Council chamber felt cold and alien after his time among the humans. Hundreds of Zephyrian leaders listened to his report with expressions ranging from skepticism to open disbelief. When he described human willingness to sacrifice themselves for strangers, several council members clicked their tongues in the expression of amused contempt. "These mammals sound mentally defective," observed High General Vexcarin. "Emotional attachment to non-family members indicates serious psychological disorders that would weaken any military force." "They are not weak," Kextar insisted. I watched 20 security officers hold off 300 professional raiders long enough to save an entire colony. I saw scientists turn mining equipment into weapons and engineers sacrifice themselves to protect children they had never met. The supreme commander of Zephyrian forces leaned forward with calculating eyes. If humans are willing to die for emotional reasons, they will be useful as shock troops against the Scorans. Their high casualty rates will be acceptable if they can absorb enemy fire while our forces maneuver for decisive strikes. Kextar realized that his leaders still didn't understand what they were dealing with. Supreme Commander, humans don't fight for the Zephyrian Empire or any other foreign power. They fight for each other and only for each other. Any attempt to use them as expendable troops will turn them into enemies instead of allies. Then they are useless to us, the Supreme Commander concluded. File your report and return to normal duties. The High Council will consider whether humanity warrants further attention. As Kextar left the council chamber, he understood that his own people were making the same mistake that countless enemies had made throughout galactic history. They saw human compassion as weakness instead of recognizing it as the source of terrible strength. They measured human worth by Zephyrian standards instead of understanding that humans operated according to completely different principles. Months later, when reports began arriving about human colonies organizing mutual defense pacts and sharing resources across star systems, Kextar was not surprised. He had seen how quickly humans could turn their homes into fortresses and their neighbors into armies when innocent people needed protection. When intelligence reports described human ships intervening in conflicts to protect civilian populations, regardless of the strategic risks involved, Kextar nodded with grim understanding. He had watched Dr. Chen risk his life to save an enemy who deserved no mercy, simply because preserving life was more important than military logic, and when the first confirmed reports arrived of human colonies voluntarily sheltering refugees from Scoran raids, even when doing so put their own populations at risk, Kextar finally understood why humanity would ultimately dominate the galaxy, not through conquest or superior technology or military brilliance, but through their absolute refusal to abandon each other or anyone else who needed help. They had discovered that the strongest force in the universe was not fear or greed or the desire for power, but the simple commitment to protect those who could not protect themselves. In his private quarters that night, Kextar wrote a final addendum to his report, one that would never be filed with the High Council. The humans will win, he wrote, not because they are stronger than their enemies, but because they are willing to become something greater than themselves. And when they do, every species in the galaxy will have to choose whether to stand with them or stand against the one force that no amount of military power can defeat, a people who refuse to let others suffer alone. He sealed the document and stored it in his personal files, knowing that someday the Zephyrian Empire would need to understand what he had learned on a small mining station in an insignificant asteroid belt. The humans were not just another species to be cataloged and evaluated. They were the future of the galaxy, whether the rest of the universe was ready for them or not. And the most terrifying part was that they didn't even know it yet 0.5 years later, when the Scoran horde finally reached human space and encountered the combined might of 1,000 colonies that had sworn to protect each other at any cost. Kextar was not surprised by the outcome. The Scorans had faced many enemies in their expansion across the galaxy, but they had never faced a species that treated every battle as if the lives of their children depended on the outcome, because for humans, that was exactly what every battle was about. The day Kextar fought beside humans, he learned that true fear was not about facing a superior enemy. True fear was realizing that somewhere in the galaxy, there existed a species so committed to protecting each other that they would never stop fighting, never stop helping, and never stop believing that every life was worth saving. And once humanity fully awakened to their potential, nothing in the universe would ever be the same again. The mining station had been rebuilt, stronger than before. Dr. Chun had been promoted to colonial administrator, Captain Santos commanded a fleet of defense vessels, and the children who had hidden in safe rooms during the pirate attack were now teenagers learning to fly starships and defend their own families. The galaxy was about to learn what Kextar had discovered that day. When humans decided to fight for something, they didn't just win battles. They changed the very meaning of what it meant to be alive among the stars.